Fluence is a decentralized compute platform. Compute has two different sides to it. There's CPUs and GPUs, and most of what you see in the decentralized compute space is GPU focused. Fluence is CPU focused, central processing units, and CPUs do 99% of the work of the internet, right? All the stuff that doesn't happen on your actual hard drive or on your phone happen in the cloud. And the cloud revenue, if you think about the cloud of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, right? That is $1 trillion business overall.
What do you see as the next sort of 2-3 years where you guys are going in terms of products?
Our model, the security model, is that, and what partly makes this work, is that investors or anyone stakes Fluence tokens to onboard any CPUs. Every CPU on board has about $12,000 worth of FLT stake. That is what makes customers know they can trust that CPU. There's that dollar value of stake attached to it. I would like to get to one Amazon data center size. That's 50,000 CPUs. There are about 600 data centers in the centralized cloud of that scale. Between Amazon, Google, Tencent, Alibaba, about 600. I'd like to get to scale of one, which is 50,000.
Welcome to We Are DePIN, a podcast focused on the world of DePIN projects. Each episode, we invite projects to discuss how they are revolutionizing the world of DePIN and Web3. Our goal is to keep you informed about everything happening in the DePIN space through insightful discussions. This podcast is brought to you by Minima, the embedded blockchain. Minima is a fully decentralized layer 1 blockchain that can embed and run a full node on edge devices. Minima is not just another blockchain. It's a fundamental shift in how decentralized networks can operate. Its lightweight architecture allows it to run a full node on chip on any mobile or IoT device, making it exceptionally adaptable to scaling any decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Minima's technology is now being supported by an expansive and engaged community of over 50,000 node operators. So join us for this next insightful discussion and enjoy the episode.
Hey Tom, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Very, very well, thanks. It's great to have you on the podcast on We Are DePIN. We met, well, Julian, one of my colleagues met you at Dubai for Token 2049. You had an event there focused on DePIN, of course. And you were saying off air that it's one of the longest standing events that you guys were probably in the space of DePIN, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's called DePIN Day. We hosted the first one in February of 24. We've hosted 11. And so the one that I met Julian at was the 11th DePIN Day. And so
Wow.
we hosted them at Token 2049 in Singapore, in Dubai, at DevCon, in Istanbul, in Lisbon, kind of all over. So it's been a terrific kind of area, a terrific forum to get DePIN founders, investors, providers, enthusiasts together to kind of talk about DePIN. I think we've had almost 4,000 people in person turn up to these, and we've had 150 speakers. So it's just a great way for the community to kind of get together, and we're excited and thrilled to be able to put those things on.
I want to ask you a question on that because it's the 11th time that you've done it. For something like DePIN, that's a long time, right? So the question is, like, how have you sort of, from the first one that you did compared to the last one, the 11th one, the most recent, how have things changed in the DePIN space?
Well, hold on. To be clear, it's not 11 years in a row.
No, I'm not saying 11 years. I'm saying 11 events, yeah.
Right. But 11 events. And so that literally is, just over a year. Because
oh, wow. Okay.
We did in 2024, I think we did 8. And this year, we've already done 3. So we did Hong Kong, Denver, and then Dubai. So the conferences are kind of bursty at times of the year. So it's just been a little bit over a year, and we've done 11. And the goal and the real point of that is that there are different communities at a lot of these conferences. And so our objective is to provide the space for DePIN founders in these different locations. And so the DePIN community is very different, say, Hong Kong or Singapore versus Denver. And of course there's overlap, right? Of course there are similarities, but we have an investor panel in every DePIN Day. The investors who come are different at different events. So that we've seen evolve. And there's always founders who haven't made one. Like the DePIN space, on the one hand, it's small overall, but on the other hand, you can't cover it in just a day. right? There are hundreds of projects. And so if you can fit 30 projects, you've got to do a lot of them in order to be able to give everyone an opportunity to participate. And so that's what this does. And you find some projects are a different one. So we work very hard to make sure we don't have the same speakers at each one. And that's worked out very well and is facilitated by doing them in different environments. So, but listen, a lot of environments have changed since February of 24, right? We're in a different world right now.
Yeah, so maybe my question is a bit different in terms of, because you say that based on different events and maybe different geographies, the DePIN maybe means different things. So what are the sort of key differences that you can maybe highlight?
Well, I guess I'd say that a lot of DePIN founders are U.S. and kind of and a little bit Europe as well, but a lot of U.S. focus. And there's a little bit less of DePIN in Asia. And the funny thing is that Asia has a terrific amount of DePIN providers, right? The first Filecoin storage providers are heavily focused in Asia. And Asia is also where a lot of DePIN hardware is made. So now you've got some obvious exceptions. You got Aether, which is huge, Singapore-based, kind of a leading GPU DePIN marketplace, which is a terrific success. So that's not to say there are none, but most seem to be Western focused, despite the fact that a lot of providers and a lot of hardware comes from the East. And I find that to be kind of an interesting thing. And then now there's charger networks. Like there's a charger network I think it's in Korea or in China, and there's a couple. There's a handful, but that's still a minority.
You mentioned an example there, so I was going to bring them up. Aether, obviously in the similar space to yourselves. We've had them. They were actually our episode 1, I think, a long time ago now. Before they did their TG, before they launched their boxes. So we had them on the podcast. We've had Nosana. We've had different sort of decentralized compute sort of companies on the podcast. Now I want to dig a bit deeper into Fluence, Tom. So I guess, where do you sit on the sort of on the landscape of decentralized compute? And after that question, I guess, how did the idea start?
Sure. So Fluence is a decentralized compute platform. Compute has two different sides to it. There's CPUs and GPUs, and most of what you see in the decentralized compute space is GPU focused. And GPUs, graphic processing units, are what are used to train AI models. And there is a scarcity, the severity of which ebbs and flows, but a scarcity of GPUs, and everybody wants to train models, right? So and there's a real business model around monetizing either latent GPUs or unused GPUs for workloads. And I think that is a business for sure. And that's where Aether is focused. It's, Akash is focused on that now as well. So that's kind of a real GPU, that's real compute area. Fluence is CPU focused, central processing units. And CPUs do 99% of the work of the internet, right? All the stuff that doesn't happen on your actual hard drive or on your phone happen in the cloud, right? That's, you've got to figure out, your kayak is searching to figure out what flight you want, or what the price is, or you're searching on Netflix for a movie. It's got to locate that movie, etc. Right? That's compute, or figure out what you're choosing, or your Uber has to calculate what the ride is and cost and how long it takes. Like, some of that takes place on your phone, but most of it takes place in the centralized cloud. And there's tons of other examples, like Limitless. So that's what Fluence is focused on. And that is, I think that the GPU marketplace is terrific. It's only going to grow. It's growing incredibly fast, but it will grow very fast for many years and still be a small part of what the CPU marketplace is right now. And so I think there's something like 2 billion CPUs that have been sold, like a massive number. And the cloud revenue, if you think about the cloud of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, right, that is, $1 trillion business overall, right, which is CPU focused, right? There's a small amount of that is actually GPU focused. So that's where we are. And the idea really comes from some of my two co-founders really realized and myself as well, but really realized the increasing consolidation in the cloud world, in the cloud marketplace, right? So you've got Amazon, Google, and Microsoft in the West, and you have Tencent, Alibaba heavily in the East. And those 5 companies control, I don't know, about 80%-ish of the internet. And that means that if your compute runs on them, you are really subject to their terms of service and subject to whatever any government wants to tell them to do. And so the little irony of our whole decentralized space is that a lot of even the nodes that run blockchains run in the centralized cloud, right? So if we don't have centralized compute, decentralized compute, we are all subject to a centralized risk. And that is everything from a company, from a technical outage to a policy change from a company to a government directed, censorship or whatever it may be. Right. So that is, and by the way, those things you may be fine with, that's okay, but that is that's not a foundation that's solid for a decentralized world. So decentralized compute has to exist if we are to have a decentralized kind of offering of any kind. And so besides, maybe Bitcoin payments, maybe Bitcoin is not all run in the cloud, right? That's fine. But, MetaMask, for example, like a lot of this runs in Amazon. So that's not a very, comfortable place to be. And so our objective is to play a part in decentralizing kind of the whole stack, and compute is a critical piece of that. So that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, because it does seem very ironic, and we've spoken about this a lot on this podcast, of how we focus a lot on the benefits of decentralization and different companies coming up like DeFi providers or RWA providers or exchanges or whatever it is. A lot of their processing happens on AWS or Google, and then you're like, okay, are you actually decentralized if it's going through those sorts of guys? Because you're at the whims of these massive companies, and if they go down or if they have outages or the censorship resistance and that sort of thing. But that's the current foundation of the internet. That's the difficult thing. So for these sort of guys, it's kind of like what they have to do, essentially. No?
Well, listen, that's kind of what we say as well, is that these projects and companies are using the cloud not because they're dying to use it, but because there haven't been viable alternatives. And there haven't been viable alternatives because it's hard, and because the cloud has spent decades and tens of billions of dollars in designing, products and services and enhancing the products and services to a way that they're relatively easy to use. And so it's hard to not do it, especially as an early stage company when they give you free credits. So it's like, why? And, right, boom, you get sucked right in. So I think no one is trying to use it, but there hasn't been an alternative. And that's what we're kind of out there, building right now and deploying.
You've spoken about the benefits of decentralization. You talk about the existing players in the Web 2 space that exist. On a practical basis, though, Tom, how do you guys differ from those Web 2 players?
I think the main kind of element here is it's open. And that means that if you do not like your compute provider, they raise price, they change something, you can shift with almost no friction, no cost, no fee, and no delay. That's really what decentralization means. Of course, it's also cheaper, and of course, there's other benefits as well. But the main point is you're not locked in. And so that gives you a great deal of freedom to leave and go. And you're like, oh, gee, I'm using a compute provider in wherever, and now I decide they raise the price. I'm going to move to another one somewhere else. And that is, I think, the main benefit of decentralization. The other benefit, obviously, is a technical one, where is if a company goes down, a provider goes down, you can also shift to another one quickly. You're not stuck because it went down and you're unable to move. So there's both a choice and a resilience that comes from decentralization. I think those are the real differentiator. And if you think about it, also, you've got in decentralized world, you've got much more heterogeneous hardware, heterogeneous networks, and heterogeneous software. So you're less subject to, kind of like the Cloudflare outage that took down, all those airline systems back, last summer, right? That was a one outage that rippled across, it was basically one service provider to the cloud that then just took out so much. And that comes from homogeneous systems and networks.
And then on a practical basis, again, how do you guys work to enable that level of decentralization?
Well, I think the main element I think that is important to stress here is that people, I guess, have a range of decentralization definitions. And so for us, we are not stringing together a large number of consumer laptops to provide enterprise grade solutions. Not what we're trying to do. That's possible. It's just a lot harder. And it's a lot harder to explain. We work with excess compute capacity at top tier data centers. So we're talking about what's called class 4 data centers, like the Switch facility outside of Las Vegas, right? These are data centers used by top Web 2 companies. And many of these data centers have excess compute. And they are the ones, that excess compute is what's added to our network. And so people using our network are using the same facilities as Web 2 companies. And so that means we don't have 1,000 providers. We have, in the order of 10 right now, right? But they're different. Each one is, they're owned by different companies and they're in different geographies, et cetera. So you don't like one, switch to another. They're in Poland and they're in, the US and they're in, I think, the UK and in Holland and kind of all over. So that is, I think, decentralization to us is not a test of high numbers. It's a test of redundancy and diversity by kind of ownership and geography.
So do you have any real world examples of clients using Fluence right now, and sort of what sort of results are they experiencing at the moment?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, we've just gotten kind of our first customers onboarded. And so the first customer segment we are going after is third-party node providers. Back to my comment about diversifying or decentralizing blockchains, right? So there's a whole kind of class of businesses that run blockchain nodes for customers. And right now they run them in the cloud, and that makes sense. It's simple, it's easy, right? But we are a cost-effective alternative to that also happens to be decentralized. And so that is our initial customer kind of vertical, if you will. And so we've onboarded several. We'll be making kind of some announcements about that probably kind of end of June about kind of the revenue numbers that we're at, which I think will be, material. And so that I'm excited about it. But I think that's the first customer, and that is that segment is a little bit hard to get a clean definition of the scale of it, but it's hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in terms of revenue potential from that one segment. And then as we scale up that segment, we add additional features and start to, bring on individual blockchains and have them run their nodes directly on Fluence, right? And then we add other services for other verticals as well. But that's our initial kind of setup right now.
And what sort of use cases are most effective when it comes to using a platform like Fluence?
Well, I think, what I just mentioned is because that is providers who both see a benefit in decentralization and lower costs, right? So that is terrific. I think down the road, it's going to be a whole much wider range of use cases that are, price sensitive and may also be time insensitive. For example, if you're doing huge workloads where you just want to use compute when it's cheapest, right? Like there's potential to use Fluence for something like that, where the compute is turned on when other people aren't using it in sort of episodic intervals. And so it's also a possibility as well. So there's a number of ways, and that's huge as well. If you're doing long, deep data, scientific research, etc. So there's a lot of potential, and that's price sensitive also, right? There's a lot of potential for that, But that's coming later. First, we want to really serve this segment well and grow from here.
You guys are competing with the likes of like Amazon and Google with this sort of thing, though. No, like, do you see any challenges or obstacles when it comes to growing to that level? Because I was looking at I can't remember which report it was, but when it came to sort of decentralized cloud storage, for instance, like adjacent, but yeah, similar to what you guys are doing, but yeah, adjacent. It still makes up such a low proportion of all the internet storage globally. I think it's like less than 1%. But yeah, it's cheaper. It's all those things that you said in terms of decentralized. A lot of the benefits also translate over to decentralized storage. So what is the sort of challenges you see when it comes to competing with these big guys?
Listen, I just literally got off a call with StorageA. They're going to do, probably they may do $10 million in revenue this year. So they are further advanced than many in the decentralized storage space in terms of revenue. So that, by the way, you're right, tiny number. They may do 100 million in 2 or 3 years. Again, almost a rounding error for Amazon, but that's a big deal for that company. And I think anyone invested in that is going to be pretty happy with that number, that amount of revenue, right? So we're all coming from such small businesses and such small areas that we can be huge successes before the centralized cloud even recognizes us. And so I think that is also the interesting point here is we're all so small, and it's of course difficult to get any customer and to get anyone to sign the line and give some revenue over, right? But if you provide that service and it's better, not because it's decentralized, but because it's better or cheaper, whatever it is, with the other attributes start to become more important over time. And so, yes, they're difficult to compete with, but they're not going to cut pricing to compete with any of us. We are way too small. We are irrelevant. And I think that's true for a lot of these others. We can also customize things, and we can target a specific segment far more specifically than makes economic sense for them to. So I think we will be able to compete in specific segments, or we can build specific tools that are very compelling and have a great offering, and then use those to continue to attack different segments. And then all of a sudden, we're so credible that it's easier and easier to get business, and then it's harder and harder for the centralized guys to compete with us.
But you're still leveraging off the centralized guys' centers, though, no? So is there a challenge there?
Centers? What do you mean?
Centralized centers, because you said you're using the ones. Say you said you're using only like 10. I think you mentioned earlier. Or maybe I misunderstood.
Right, but those aren't what makes that centralized. There's not. I mean, Switch is not an Amazon facility.
Okay, got you.
And if someone did rent hardware at an Amazon data center, as an example, it would not be on the Amazon network. And so, yes, you get the benefit of the Amazon infrastructure, but you would then be able to switch like this if you wanted to, which you cannot do very easily if you're on the Amazon actual network. Now, I don't think anyone right now, none of our providers right now are operating out of one of the cloud provider data centers. But let me back up and make the point here that we think of the centralized cloud as having all the data centers. They do not. There are a ton of other both independent data center providers, independent data centers that operate, are built all the time. I mean, and Switch, for example, is a pretty huge company that is only in the data center business. Now, they may build and sell a data center to Amazon, but they also operate these facilities themselves. And that's a big multi-billion-dollar business. So there are plenty of them out there that operate entirely independently from the centralized cloud. And I think Amazon, I think about it, builds all of its own data centers. I believe Google does as well. And there are plenty of companies out there that compete on just the data center side of it for companies that self-host or whatever it might be.
I see. Okay, very interesting. Talking about the long-term roadmap for Fluence, Tom. So what do you see as the next sort of 2-3 years, or up to 5 years for where you guys are going in terms of product?
Well, listen, first you mentioned a key thing, product, and that is something that we realize and are focused on is you can't build it and hope that people come. You have to productize this. And I think early class of DePIN projects built a kind of protocol and hope people would come to it. So we are very focused on product, and that's why we're focused on one customer segment initially. We will add additional ones. But listen, I think about this in a couple ways. I think about it in terms of revenue to the network. I also think about it in terms of CPUs. And so let me tell you where I want to go. Our model, the security model, is that, and what partly makes this work, is that investors or anyone stakes Fluence tokens to onboard any CPUs. Every CPU on board has about $12,000 worth of FLT staked. All right, so that is what makes customers know they can trust that CPU. Is there's that dollar value of stake attached to it. I would like to get to one Amazon data center size. That's 50,000 CPUs. There are about 600 data centers in the centralized cloud of that scale. Between Amazon, Google, Tencent, Alibaba, about 600. I'd like to get to scale of one, which is 50,000. If we get to that, that would require $600 million worth of FLT stake. That's multiples of our fully diluted coin cap right now, right? So that is our objective. That's not happening this year. It's not happening next year. But if we can scale, that would be the kind of goal that I want to get to, which is an insignificant amount of scale vis-a-vis the centralized cloud, but would be a massive home run, right, for Fluence or for anyone in this decentralized cloud to have that amount of stake attached to your compute, right? So that is, and then obviously that implies multiples of that in revenue, which would be terrific. So that's kind of the goal, but we're starting small, right? We're going to start with, our pipeline now is about $5 million ARR, right? That's the pipeline now. And we're just going to execute, close that, and keep building it, and see how far we can get, how fast we can.
So there is a focus on product, but it's also a focus on, this is what I like about DePIN as well. It seems like revenue is so front of mind and commercial, application, rather than other sort of applications of Web3, that it's a bit more sort of, it takes longer to get to that sort of commercial stage.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and I think DePIN is the real bridge between crypto and the rest of the world because of revenue, and because revenue, if you structure your token economics right, tie into your token. And actually, I just came out about a month ago with a DePIN token economics report that you should put a link to, but I kind of go into this in a lot of detail about the models of DePIN token economics and kind of why it's important. The key thing is you want scale of your business, of your protocol, to translate to token value. Otherwise, what are you doing? And so there are different ways to do that. I think stake works in our thing, but buy and burn for many others is the way to do it. So, but yeah, I'm excited for that to start to kick. And I kind of think that later this year and next year are the real years for revenue to really start to kick into this in this ecosystem.
Very, very cool. Tom, we're going to get to the end of the podcast, but there's a question I'm dying to ask you because, yeah, you've talked about Fluence for a long time, and also at the very beginning of the conversation, how things have evolved in the DePIN space in the last sort of year or so than you guys have been putting on these events. What is your favorite use case of DePIN outside of what you guys are immediately doing?
I mean, listen, it's really hard because there's about 3 that I really like, and all of them are kind of things that either didn't exist or are so superior now. But one I'll mention is people have heard me talk about this a little bit, but Spexy, which is a drone mapping company, and so they use drones to map stuff that they can map about 10 times more resolution than a satellite. So 10 times more resolution. Wow. At maybe, I'll make it up, 20% of the cost, and they can map it. If they get an order, they could map it in like 2 days versus a satellite or a plane, which takes, weeks, and they can do it with cloud cover, which a satellite and a plane can't, right? So way more resolution, way faster, way cheaper in more weather conditions. It's like, how do you compete with that? So that just kind of, never would have occurred to me, but that's kind of a cool one. And I just got to mention one more quickly, which is also just such an industry I had no idea about, but plane tracking. Right now, that's a volunteer network out there. There's a company called Wingbits, which is you buy an antenna, you put it on, you get a hex or whatever it is, and you put the antenna up, and now you have a DePIN network that's going to be more rolled out, more robust, more reliable than the current kind of volunteer system out there, and people get paid for it. These are such cool, different use cases.
Yeah. With those sorts of I know Wingbase very well, and with these sorts of DePINs, they're generating so much high quality data. I always wonder that will there be a point where there needs to these DePINs will basically collaborate and basically try to collect data together, because Wingbits, for instance, could probably collect data for something else, but they're very very hyper focused towards one application. You see.
Well, they do. I believe they've partnered with
Yeah.
GeoNet, right? And so
That's the example I was going to give.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there is some of that's happening, but the other part is AI spatial mapping, which are companies like Aqua, which are taking all the different imaging they can get from different DePINs in order to create spatial maps, 3D maps effectively to allow AI to navigate the real world. And so that is almost like a DePIN of DePIN, if you will, because it taps into all the data and it pays for all the data that these different protocols are generating and puts it all together. So that use case is a little harder to grasp, I think, but that is, I think, the closest to what you're referencing in terms of sort of aggregation of all this.
Yeah, for sure. Tom, it's been such a pleasure having you on the We Are DePIN podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Very, very last question. How can people stay in touch with you and Fluence going forward?
Well, listen, we are Fluence_project on X. I am the Tom Tro. And, check out our DePIN days. If you're at any of the large conferences, look for it. And if you want to look at DePIN, the other DePIN podcast. I'm excited to be on the podcast. We got to all work together to grow this space. So appreciate everything you're doing to draw attention to it as well.
Yeah, we've got to raise the space collectively for sure.
Definitely.
But Tom, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. Absolute pleasure. And I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion, brought to you by the embedded blockchain Minima, the only layer 1 blockchain lean and compact enough to run a full node on chip or on any mobile IoT device. If you're new to DePIN, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you so much for watching again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.